The mantle weighed on my shoulders like an oath. The warmth of the velvet mingled with the trembling of my body, while the entire hall held its breath. He had just covered me in front of everyone, the bastard maid, the daughter of shame, and his words echoed like a decree. No one touches what is under my protection. But protection, I would soon discover, was just another name for destiny. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The hall burned under the glare of the flames and the murmur of the nobles. I could barely breathe. The rough fabric covering my body was not a dress but a public punishment, a silent sentence. The ladies laughed behind lacy fans and the men pretended not to see, though their eyes roamed over my shame like blades. With every step I took, the marble floor seemed to pulse beneath my bare feet, reminding me of what I was there, the bastard maid, daughter of scandal, useful only when the wine needed to be served. The air smelled of fermented grapes and humiliation. The goblets trembled in my hands, and I heard the sound of my short breaths mixed with restrained laughter. They said I should learn my place, that the insolence inherited from my mother needed to be tamed. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes down, trying not to let the pain overflow in tears that burned but did not fall. My mother had been a dancer, brought from distant lands to entertain the court. They said she had eyes like precious stones and the voice of a nightingale. The lord of the fief desired her for an entire season, and when she finally yielded, he took her as if it were his right. I was born 9 moons later during the cruelest winter the kingdom had ever known. She died in childbirth, bleeding on dirty straw, while the ladies of the court dined on roasted meat and laughed in the upper chambers. I survived, but only to carry the weight of her sin. I grew up between the kitchens and the stables, learning that my name didn't matter, only my servitude. The other maids avoided me, fearing my curse was contagious. The nobles used me as an example of shame, pointing to me when they wanted to teach their daughters about purity and honor. I was the living warning of what happened when one crossed the boundaries of decorum. But on that night, when they dressed me in that rag and forced me to serve wine at the great banquet, something inside me began to crack. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a kind of cold awareness, like slowly waking from a nightmare only to realize it's real. Every laugh I heard, every look of contempt, every venomous whisper, all of it piled up like stones on my chest. It was at that moment, when the crowd's laughter became almost unbearable, that the hall fell silent. The change was so abrupt that I stumbled, the wine nearly spilling from the pitcher. The sound of conversations died like a candle blown out by the wind. Even the flames of the torches seemed to hesitate, their shadows dancing more slowly on the stone walls. He had arrived. The king crossed the colonnaded hall with slow, firm steps, as if the very air bowed to make way for him. No herald announced his name. The sound of his boots and the invisible weight he carried with him were enough. His presence had the density of a contained storm, the kind that makes animals hide before the first drop of rain falls. I hadn't seen him for months, not since the last public judgment in the main square. On that occasion, I was among the crowd, hidden behind wine barrels, watching as he decided the fate of 3 men accused of treason. His voice had been calm, almost gentle, but each word had fallen like an axe on wood. 2 were pardoned. 1 was exiled. No one questioned his decision. Now, as he walked through the hall, I recognized the rhythm of the silence that surrounded him. They say powerful men are made of iron, but his was another material, made of gaze, of control, of something that grips the soul before it even touches the skin. His face was one of severe angles, marked by a thin scar that crossed his left eyebrow, a memory of some battle I knew nothing about. His eyes were dark, deep as wells, and seemed to see through the masks everyone wore. He didn't look at the kneeling nobles, nor at the ladies who bowed their heads in reverence. His eyes swept the hall with the precision of someone who knows every stone, every shadow, every secret hidden under expensive rugs. And then those eyes found mine. The impact was physical. I felt as if something heavy had dropped in my stomach. My fingers tightened on the pitcher with such force that my knuckles turned white. I couldn't look away, even though I knew I should. A maid does not look the king in the eye. A bastard does not dare to exist in his field of vision. But I looked, and he kept looking. When he stood before me, time seemed to hesitate, as if the very moments feared to advance without permission. I still held the wine pitcher, and my hands trembled so much that the liquid brushed the crystal and stained the tips of his fingers as he reached for the goblet I was trying to fill. A murmur ran through the hall like wind through heavy curtains. I wanted to kneel, to ask for forgiveness for something I didn't even know, but my legs wouldn't obey. He just looked at me, not with contempt nor pity, but with a kind of recognition that wounded me more than any word could. It was as if he saw something in me that I myself did not know, something that both frightened and fascinated me. Who ordered this? His voice didn't need to rise. It was deep and calm, which was precisely why everyone feared it. Each syllable carried the weight of an unspoken threat, a promise of consequences no one wished to face. No one answered. The ladies shrank in their silk dresses like flowers wilting under the scorching sun. The lord of the fief, sitting on the side throne in his embroidered robes and glittering rings, pretended to adjust the jewels on his hands, his eyes fixed on some distant point. His wife, Lady Morgana, the woman who had ordered my humiliation, remained as still as a statue, but I saw the tremor in her painted lips. The silence was an invisible battlefield, where every passing second stretched the tension like a rope pulled to its breaking point. I still felt the cold rising from the stones to my ankles, my whole body tense, waiting for the next humiliation, the next blow. But he didn't move with anger. Slowly, with deliberate movements that made each gesture seem like a ritual, he undid the clasp of the royal mantle, the same mantle no servant dared to touch. That fabric embroidered with gold thread that only members of the royal family could wear. And then, in front of everyone, he placed it on my shoulders. The fabric weighed on me like a solemn oath, like a pact sealed with invisible blood. The warmth of the velvet mingled with the heat of my trembling body, and for a moment I feared I would collapse right there, my knees giving way under the physical and symbolic weight of that gesture. The entire hall held its breath. I heard the ladies' whispers, the metallic sound of goblets meeting marble as someone dropped them in shock, and I realized that something, in that precise instant, had broken. Not just protocol or the social order, something deeper, more fundamental. An invisible barrier that separated the possible from the impossible had been crossed, and none of us yet knew what that meant. No one touches what is under my protection. His words were simple, almost casual, but the echo remained even after he walked away, his steps resounding on the marble as he left the hall through the same colonnaded corridor. No one followed him. No one dared to move. I stood there, in the center of the hall, covered by the mantle that smelled of rain and power, of distant spices and worked leather. I felt everyone's gaze shift as if an invisible tide had turned. From mockery to astonishment, from certainty to doubt, from contempt to something that looked like fear. That gesture didn't free me. I knew that with a clarity that cut deeper than any blade. To be protected by him was a destiny disguised as salvation. A golden chain that was still a chain. But in that moment, with the velvet warming my cold skin and the silence weighing on us all, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. Lady Morgana was the first to rise, her movements stiff with contained fury. Her eyes met mine, and I saw in them a promise of vengeance that made me shiver under the protective mantle. She left the hall with hurried steps, her blue satin dress dragging across the floor like the trail of a storm. Other ladies followed her, their whispers growing as soon as they passed through the doors. The lord of the fief remained seated, but his posture had changed. He was no longer the arrogant man who had laughed at my humiliation. Now he seemed smaller, shrunken in his throne like a child caught in a lie. He knew, just as I did, that he had crossed an invisible line. The king did not forgive easily. Slowly, the other maids came to get me. Their hands guided me out of the hall, but none of them spoke to me. The silence between us was different now, charged with something I couldn't name. Jealousy, perhaps, or fear, or both mixed in a poisonous recipe. When I finally reached the servants' quarters, in the back of the castle where the smell of food and sweat mingled with the mold of the ancient walls, I collapsed onto the straw mattress. The mantle still covered my shoulders, and I didn't have the courage to take it off. I pressed the fabric to my face, and for the first time since my mother's death, I cried. Not from sadness, but from something more complex, something that burned and soothed at the same time. In the following days, the corridors became traps of whispers. They said I had bewitched him, that my mother, before she died, had left me the same poisonous gift she had used to seduce the Lord of the Fief. No one knew that the only spell was the silence with which I endured the shame. The ability to keep existing when everything around me tried to erase me. I saw looks of hatred from between the tapestries as I passed through the main corridors carrying baskets of clean linen. I heard doors slam as I approached, conversations dying mid-sentence. Every step inside the castle sounded like a veiled threat, as if the building itself had turned against me. The other maids avoided me even more than before. If I entered the kitchen, they would leave, muttering excuses. If I tried to help with the chores, I would find my work already done or deliberately undone. The loneliness I had always known deepened, becoming an abyss where only the echoes of my own breath kept me company. But the mantle remained with me, kept, hidden under the mattress in the stable where I slept, far from prying eyes and envious hands. Sometimes at night, when I was sure everyone was asleep, I would touch it in secret, feeling the texture of the embroidery like someone touching a forbidden secret. The golden threads formed symbols I couldn't read, stories of battles and conquests that belonged to a world far beyond my reach. And every time I did, I remembered his gaze. That gaze that promised no tenderness or romantic rescue but demanded courage. It was a look that said I would not be spared, that the path ahead would be harder, not easier. And yet, something in me responded to this silent challenge with a determination I didn't know I possessed. When the next ceremony was announced, 2 weeks after the incident in the hall, we all knew he would return. The entire castle prepared with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The hall would once again be lit by hundreds of candles, the tables laden with enough food to feed an entire village, and I, once again, was to serve the wine. Lady Morgana summoned me personally on the morning of the banquet. I found her in the private gardens, among white roses and marble fountains where only nobles were allowed to tread. She didn't look at me when she spoke, her eyes fixed on the flowers as if they were more worthy of attention. "You will serve the main table tonight." Her voice was icy, each word precisely articulated. "And you will wear the appropriate uniform. No incidents. No spectacles. Understood?" "I understand, my lady." I kept my eyes down, my hands clasped in front of me in the perfect posture of submission I had been taught since childhood. She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes made me take a step back. It wasn't just hatred. It was something more calculated, more dangerous. A promise of destruction planned with care. The king has many responsibilities, many concerns. She plucked a rose petal, crushing it between her fingers. He cannot be distracted by insignificance. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. She wasn't warning me. She was threatening me. And we both knew I had no power to defend myself. That night, when I entered the hall with the silver tray balanced in my trembling hands, I heard the same voices, the same sharp laughter that had followed me for as long as I could remember. But the sound no longer hurt me in the same way. Something had changed inside me, a kind of invisible armor that his gesture had forged. I knew he was there without needing to look. The air betrayed his presence, dense and charged like before a rainstorm, that weight that made conversations drop in volume and movements become more careful. I felt my breath quicken, my heart beating against my ribs like a bird trying to escape a cage. I served the wine with steadier hands than I expected, moving between the tables with the grace my mother supposedly possessed. I didn't look at anyone directly, but I felt every gaze on me, every whisper that formed and died as I passed. And then, when I finally reached the main table where he sat next to the Lord of the Fief and other important nobles, our eyes met again. It was as inevitable as the tide following the moon, as natural as breathing. I realized, in that frozen moment in time, that he hadn't covered me out of compassion that night weeks ago. The gesture had been deeper than that, more complex. A choice, perhaps a promise or a warning. Something that not even he dared to admit in front of others. Something that violated all the rules that upheld that world of hierarchies and pure blood. The future, I understood with a frightening clarity would not be made of kindness or gentle protection. There would be a war of gazes, secrets too heavy to be spoken, veiled and dangerous alliances. And I, the bastard daughter who served wine and slept on straw, was already caught in a destiny I did not choose, but which, in some impossible-to-explain way, had always awaited me. That night marked the beginning of something none of us could have foreseen. When the banquet ended and the nobles staggered away, drunk on wine, I found a folded note under my door. The paper was fine, expensive, and the handwriting too perfect to be from any servant. The words were few, but enough to make my blood run cold. North Library, midnight, come alone. There was no signature, but none was needed. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on the royal decrees posted on the castle walls. He was summoning me, and refusal was not an option. The North Library was in the oldest part of the castle, an isolated tower where only scholars and members of the royal family were allowed to enter. I had never been there, not even to clean. The maids said it was a place of ancient magic, where books whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. I waited until the castle slept, until the last sound of footsteps died in the stone corridors. Then, with my heart racing and my hands sweating, I put on a dark cloak over my servant's dress and slipped through the shadows like a ghost. The night was cold, a crescent moon casting silver light on the ancient stones. My steps were silent. Years of practice had taught me to move without being noticed. I climbed the spiral staircase of the North Tower, each step heightening my anxiety and a strange excitement I couldn't name. The library door was ajar, a golden light leaking through the crack. I hesitated for a moment that seemed to last an eternity, my hand hovering over the dark wood. Then I pushed the door and entered. He stood with his back to me, looking at the shelves that rose to the vaulted ceiling, filled with leather-bound books and time-yellowed parchments. He wore simple clothes without the crown or the royal mantle, but his presence remained dominant, occupying the space in a way that made the air seem denser. "Close the door." His voice echoed softly among the shelves. He didn't turn to look at me. I obeyed with trembling fingers, the latch falling into place with a click that sounded too loud in the silence. We were alone, completely isolated from the rest of the world, and the awareness of it made me tremble. "Can you read?" The question caught me off guard. "No, my lord." My voice came out weaker than I intended. "No one taught me." Then he turned, and what I saw in his face left me breathless. It was not the austere king who judged traitors or commanded armies. It was a tired man with deep shadows under his eyes and an expression that bordered on vulnerability. "I should have taught you." He approached slowly, each step measured. "Your mother asked me to. Before she died, she made me promise I would take care of you." The floor seemed to move beneath my feet. My mother? He had known my mother? She was not just a dancer. His voice was low, intimate, as if sharing a secret kept for years. She was an advisor to my mother, the queen. She came from a distant kingdom with wisdom about herbs and stars. When the queen fell ill, your mother tried to save her. I closed my eyes, processing information that turned my world upside down. My mother, the woman I had known only through the cruel stories whispered in the corridors, had been someone completely different. And the Lord of the Fief? The question came out as a bitter whisper. He forced her. His jaw tightened with ancient anger. By the time I found out, it was too late. She was pregnant, and he had demoted her to a maid to hide the scandal. Your mother made me promise I would not punish him, that it would only bring more trouble. But I made another promise, that I would protect her child. Are you my father? The words escaped before I could stop them. A desperate whisper of hope. No. There was pain in his voice. But I promised her I would be better than a father, that I would be your shield. The silence that followed was heavy with unsaid emotions. Years of loneliness, of humiliation, of unanswered questions, all colliding with this unexpected truth. He was not my father, but he had watched over me from a distance, fulfilling a promise made to a dead woman. Why now? Why wait so long? Because there was no safe alternative. He came closer, so close I could see the worry lines on his face. But when I saw you in that hall, humiliated by people who are not worth the dirt under your nails, I realized that to wait any longer would be to break my promise. And now? What happens now? My voice trembled with fear and expectation. Now you learn to read, to write, to defend yourself. He placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch firm but gentle. You will stop being invisible. And that, he said, his voice laced with a warning, will be more dangerous than anything you have ever faced. He was right. The following days proved that visibility was a double-edged sword. The lessons began that very night, secret meetings in the library where he taught me letters and numbers, history and politics. I discovered I had a thirst for knowledge, that my mind absorbed information like dry earth absorbs rain. But with each new lesson, each book I learned to decipher, the danger grew. Lady Morgana had spies all over the castle, and soon she knew of our nightly meetings. The rumors spread like wildfire. They said I was his mistress, that I had bewitched him, that we were plotting to overthrow the Lord of the Fief and take total control of the region. None of it was true, but the truth rarely matters when power is at stake. What had begun as an old promise had turned into something more complex, a connection that neither of us knew how to name. He was not my father, but he was also not just my protector, and I was not just his pupil, but something that defied all the categories that this rigid world allowed. The first attempt on my life came 3 weeks after the first lesson, a ladder that gave way under my feet, rotten steps that should have been repaired. I fell hard, injuring my shoulder, but I survived. The second time it was poisoned food left in my room. I discovered it in time only because one of the younger maids, moved by guilt or kindness, warned me before I ate. He was furious when he found out. For the first time, I saw the man his enemies feared, the king who could destroy lives with a word. He ordered an investigation, but we both knew who was behind it. The problem was proving it. Lady Morgana was careful, her hands always clean, her allies loyal and silent. But she made one mistake. She underestimated my determination to survive and the extent of the protection he was willing to offer. The turning point came during the Harvest Festival, when the castle welcomed visitors from all corners of the kingdom. The Great Hall was even more crowded than usual, decorated with golden leaves and autumn flowers. There was music, dancing, and the air smelled of hot cider and cinnamon. I was serving as always, but now I wore a better dress, a gift from him that had caused a scandal among the other maids. It wasn't a noble's dress, but it wasn't a servant's rag either. It was something in between, grey as mist, which made me seem to exist between worlds. It was during the main dance, when everyone was distracted by the music and wine, that it happened. One of the guards approached him, whispered something in his ear. I saw his face change, the mask of courtesy falling for an instant to reveal pure anger. He stood up, motioned for silence. The music died. They brought the Lord of the Fief to the centre of the hall, forced to his knees by guards who were loyal only to the king. The old noble, so arrogant weeks ago, now trembled like a leaf in the wind. "We have discovered something interesting," the king's voice echoed clear and cold through the hall. "Hidden documents, proof of treason, of collusion with enemy kingdoms." His voice paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "And assassination attempts against those under my protection." A shocked murmur went through the crowd. Lady Morgana turned pale but maintained her composure, her mind clearly working on how to escape the closing trap. But he wasn't finished. "Bring the witness." A cloaked figure was brought forward, and when the hood fell, I recognized one of Lady Morgana's ladies-in-waiting. The woman was crying, but her voice was clear when she confessed. She spoke of the orders to poison my food, to sabotage the ladder, of plans to accuse me of theft and see me hanged in the public square. Each word was a stone thrown into water, creating ripples that would reach every corner of that closed world. I saw shocked faces, others satisfied. Some nobles were already recalculating their alliances, deciding which side to jump to before the ship sank completely. Lady Morgana tried to speak, but her voice failed her. Her husband, the Lord of the Fief, bowed his head, defeated. He knew there was no escape. The king had enough evidence to execute them right there, and we all knew he had that right. But instead of ordering an execution, he did something unexpected. Exile. Your lands will be confiscated. Your titles revoked. You have until dawn to leave my kingdom. If any of you are seen within these borders after that, the sentence will be death. It was mercy, but the kind of mercy that was worse than death for people like them. Without titles, without land, without power, they would be less than nothing. And everyone would know why. The humiliation would be complete and permanent. When the guards took them away, the hall erupted in frantic conversation. But he raised his hand again, calling for silence. There is another matter to be resolved. He looked directly at me across the crowd. The daughter of my most trusted advisor has been treated as a servant, as less than human for too long. That ends now. My heart stopped. What was he doing? From this night forward, she will be officially recognized as a lady of the court, with all the rights and privileges of that position. She will receive a proper education, proper quarters, and will be treated with the respect due to her true birth. The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to breathe. What he had just done was revolutionary, impossible. To elevate a bastard, a former maid, to the position of a lady of the court was to break all the rules, to challenge the entire social order. But he was the king, and his word was law. Does anyone dare to question my decision? His voice held a clear challenge. No one spoke. No one moved. Then it is decided. That night changed everything. I was taken to the chambers that once belonged to Lady Morgana. Spacious rooms with stained glass windows and beds with silk canopies. The maids who once avoided me now served me, their faces carefully neutral but their eyes revealing resentment. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. Lessons in etiquette, dancing music. I learned to walk with the straight posture of noblewomen, to hold utensils I had once only cleaned, to converse on subjects I had never imagined understanding. It was exhausting and exciting, terrifying and liberating. But the elevation brought new dangers. I was no longer just the protected bastard. I was the lady who challenged the order, the symbol of change that many feared. The more conservative nobles saw me as a threat, proof that the king was willing to break ancient traditions. And traditions, I discovered, had fierce defenders. There were more attempts, subtler now. Poison in wine goblets during banquets, rumors spread about my character, attempts to frame me in fabricated scandals. But he was always vigilant, his spies everywhere protecting me from shadows I didn't always see. And our relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of us expected. What had begun as a promise had turned into mentorship, and mentorship into something deeper. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a connection, a mutual understanding that transcended words. I discovered that beneath the crown and the royal mantle was a lonely man, trapped in a role he had not chosen. His wife, the queen, had died years ago, leaving him without heirs and surrounded by people who saw him only as a tool of power. He trusted few, and now I was among those few. The lessons in the library continued, but now we discussed more than letters and history. We talked about philosophy, about justice, about the weight of carrying responsibilities that shaped lives. He told me about difficult decisions, about the price of keeping a kingdom united when factions pulled in opposite directions. And I, for the first time, had a voice. My opinions, born from years of living on the lowest rungs of the hierarchy, offered perspectives he had never considered. I showed him how certain laws affected the poor, how the arrogance of the nobles created resentment that could explode into revolts. Slowly, he began to make changes. Small at first, reforms in taxes and labor laws that benefited the servants. But each change further enraged the conservative nobles, who saw their advantages being eroded. The tension grew like a storm on the horizon. It was known that something would have to give, that the unstable balance could not last. And the answer came in the form of a conspiracy that almost cost everything. It was discovered during a council meeting when intercepted documents revealed plans to assassinate the king during the next royal hunt. The conspirators were powerful nobles, men with private armies and alliances that stretched beyond the borders. And at the center of the conspiracy was something that made my blood run cold. The plan was not just to kill him, but to eliminate me first, removing his vulnerability before the final blow. When he told me, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Real fear. Not for himself, but for me. You need to leave. Go to a safe place until this is over. His voice was urgent, his hands gripping my shoulders. No. I surprised myself with the firmness in my own voice. If I run, it will prove they were right, that I am your weakness. I will not give them that victory. They will kill you. Then I will die. But not as a coward. I looked him in the eyes, seeing my reflection in his dark pupils. My mother did not run. She faced what came, even knowing it could destroy her. I will not dishonor her memory now. Something in his face changed. The worry was still there, but there was also something else. Pride, perhaps, or a recognition of strength that mirrored his own. Then you will stand by my side. His voice became firm, resolute, but on my terms. You will learn to defend yourself. The next few weeks were intense. He assigned his best master-at-arms to train me, not in open combat, but in self-defense, in how to use small knives hidden in the folds of dresses. I learned about poisons, how to identify and treat them, about secret codes and how to send messages that only trusted allies could read. I transformed from a defenseless lady into something more dangerous. I was not a warrior, but I was not an easy victim either. And when the royal hunt finally took place, I was ready. The day dawned cold and overcast, with mist covering the royal forest like a shroud. The party was large, dozens of nobles and guards, all armed and cheerful. But beneath the surface, tense currents vibrated, each person aware that this day could end in blood. I rode beside him, something that caused murmurs, but no one dared to contest. My hand occasionally touched the knife hidden under my riding cloak, confirming its presence. My eyes scanned the forest, looking for signs of an ambush. The attack came when we were furthest from the main group, chasing a deer he had wounded with an arrow. The assassins emerged from the trees like ghosts, 3 men dressed in black, their faces covered. But he was prepared. Loyal guards emerged from their own hidden positions, and what the conspirators had planned as an ambush became a trap. The fight was brutal and swift, the sound of metal on metal echoing among the ancient trees. Blood-stained fallen leaves. One of the assassins broke free from the confusion and came straight for me. I saw the determination in his eyes, the decision to at least complete part of the mission. My hand found the knife and I drew it in a movement that surprised me with its fluidity. When he lunged, I twisted to the side as I had been taught, and the blade found flesh. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was enough to stop him until the guards arrived. When they took him down, the cloth covering his face slipped. I recognized him. He was one of the nobles from the council, someone I had served wine to just weeks ago. The conspiracy was dismantled that day. The leaders were captured, tried, and executed. Their territories confiscated, their families exiled. It was ruthless and necessary, a clear message that defying the king had definitive consequences. But the real change came afterward. In the great hall before all the assembled nobles, he made an announcement that no one expected. "This woman," he said, gesturing to me, "saved my life, not out of obligation or duty, but by choice. She showed courage that shames half the men in this hall. And more than that, she has shown wisdom, vision, and a strength of character that this kingdom desperately needs." He paused, letting the tension build. "Therefore, from this day forward, she will be my official advisor. Her counsel will carry the same weight as that of the most ancient nobles. Her voice will be heard in all important decisions affecting this kingdom." The scandal was immediate and immense. An advisor, a bastard ex-servant with real power over matters of state. It was unthinkable, but he wasn't asking for permission. He was declaring a reality. And I, standing beside him with my dress stained with blood and the knife still at my belt, accepted the role that fate had carved out for me. Not because I wanted it, but because I now understood that it was necessary. Someone needed to represent those who had no voice, the forgotten and the downtrodden. And that person would be me. The months that followed tested everything I had learned. I sat in councils where men twice my age looked at me with ill-disguised contempt. I proposed laws that protected the weak and limited the abuses of the powerful. I faced constant opposition, but he was always there, supporting my initiatives when they made sense, challenging me when they didn't. Our relationship remained indefinable. We were not lovers, though many assumed we were. We were not family, though the connection felt deeper than blood. We were partners, two beings marked by loss and promises, working to create something better than the world we inherited. And slowly, the kingdom began to change. Servants gained rights they were previously denied. Taxes were redistributed more fairly. Courts of justice began to hear complaints from everyone, not just the nobles. They were small changes, but each one shifted the balance of power a little more toward the disadvantaged. There was resistance, of course. Minor revolts from nobles who saw their privileges diminishing. But the king was strong, and now he had something he didn't have before. Legitimacy that came not just from birth, but from justice. The common people began to see him differently, not as a distant tyrant, but as a protector who truly cared. And I, the maid who became a lady who became an advisor, carried the weight of this transformation every day. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, days I questioned if I was capable. But whenever doubt threatened to consume me, I would touch the mantle kept in my room, remember that moment in the hall when everything changed, and find the strength to continue. The true story, I realized, was not about him saving me. It was about us saving each other. He from the loneliness of a power without purpose, I from the invisibility of a life without meaning. Together we created something new, something that defied the expectations of a rigid world. But destiny still had twists in store for us. On the first anniversary of my appointment as advisor, a delegation from the neighboring kingdom arrived at the castle, bringing a proposal of an alliance through marriage. Princess Ilara, a young woman of only 19, was offered as a bride to the king, a union that would bring lasting peace and significant trade advantages. When he told me, we were in the library, our private sanctuary where so many revelations had taken place. The candlelight cast dancing shadows on his face, and for the first time since I had truly known him, I couldn't read his expression. "It's a good proposal," he said, but his voice sounded distant, as if the words came from very far away. "The kingdom needs heirs, stability. The alliance would strengthen our borders." I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. Of course it was a good proposal. It was perfect, in fact. Exactly the kind of rational decision a king should make. But something inside me was tearing apart, a pain I didn't know I could feel. "Do you think I should accept?" The question caught me off guard. He had never asked for my opinion on such personal matters before. "I think you should do what is best for the kingdom." My voice came out firmer than I expected. "It has always been this way. The kingdom before all else." He turned to face me, and what I saw in his eyes made me shiver. There was something there. Something that had always been present but never named. An invisible current that bound us to each other in ways that went beyond protection or mentorship. And what if what is best for me is not the same as what is best for the kingdom? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unsaid meanings. I felt my heart race, my breath becoming shallow. We were in dangerous territory now, on the edge of a precipice neither of us had dared to look at directly before. "Then you do what you must, because that's who you are." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "But don't ask me to make it easier for you." The tension between us was almost tangible, like a rope stretched to its limit. For a moment I thought he would say something, give voice to what we both felt but could not name. But the moment passed, and he moved away, back into the shadows between the shelves. "I will receive the delegation tomorrow. I will make my decision after I meet the princess." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at the window of my chambers, watching the stars and trying to understand the whirlwind of emotions consuming me. When had I become so dependent on his presence? When had the connection between us transformed into something that hurt to be threatened? Princess Ilara arrived at dawn, brought in a carriage decorated with gold and escorted by a dozen guards in gleaming armor. She was beautiful, with golden hair that cascaded down her back and blue eyes like a summer sky. But more than that, she was educated, intelligent, spoke 3 languages, and played the harp masterfully. She was, in every respect, the perfect bride for a king. I watched from a high balcony as he received her in the main courtyard, bowing in proper reverence as she stepped down from the carriage. I saw how she smiled, shy but genuine, and how he responded with impeccable courtesy. They were a suitable pair, united by logic and political necessity. And I was the bastard who had forgotten her place. The following days were a refined torture. Princess Ilara was hosted in the finest chambers, treated with all the honours due a future queen. Banquets were held in her honour, where she sat beside him while I watched from my place among the advisors. She was surprisingly kind to me. She showed none of the contempt I expected from someone of such pure blood. We talked about books and music, and I discovered that, in other circumstances, we could have been friends. But the circumstances were what they were, and every smile she gave him, every conversation they shared, was a knife twisting in my chest. It was on the 5th night of her visit that he came to my chambers. It was late, the full moon casting silver light through the curtains. He knocked on the door without announcement, and when I opened it, he was there, still dressed in the formal clothes from dinner, but with his face marked by exhaustion. "May I come in?" I stepped aside in silence, letting him pass. He walked to the window, standing with his back to me, his shoulders tense under the fine fabric of his shirt. "I am going to refuse the proposal." The words fell between us like stones in still water. I was paralyzed, processing what he had just said. "That's madness," I found my voice, though it trembled. "The alliance is important. The kingdom needs heirs. You said so yourself." "The kingdom will survive." He turned to face me, and there was something fierce in his eyes, something I had never seen before. "But I can't—" He paused, searching for words. "I can't marry her when all I can think about is you." The air left my lungs as if I had been punched. I stood there, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. "Don't say that." My voice came out as a desperate whisper. "You can't say that. Why not? It's the truth." He approached, each step deliberate. "Do you think I don't know what has happened between us? What has been growing every day, with every conversation, with every moment we've fought side by side? There can be nothing between us." I backed away, the cold wall against my back. "I'm a bastard, a former maid. The scandal would destroy everything we've built." "Then let it be destroyed." His voice was low, intense. "I have spent my entire life doing what was expected, what was necessary for the kingdom. I married a woman I did not love because it was my duty. I have carried the weight of the crown alone because it was supposed to be so. But you—" His hand touched my face, a gesture so gentle it made me tremble. "You made me remember that I am human, that there is more to life than duty and sacrifice." Tears began to stream down my face. "I feel it too," I whispered. "But feeling it doesn't make it right. It doesn't change who we are, what the world expects of us." Then we changed the world. His eyes sought mine, and I saw in them a determination that was both frightening and thrilling. "We've already broken so many rules. Why not this one too?" "Because this one will destroy us, and it will destroy the kingdom with us. Or it will save it." He wiped my tears with his thumb. "You taught me that power without humanity is tyranny, that rules exist to serve people, not to imprison them. If we cannot choose our own hearts, what right do we have to rule the hearts of others?" His words disarmed me completely. I knew he was both right and wrong, that what we wanted and what was possible were two different things. But in that moment, with the moonlight enveloping us and the whole world reduced to that small space between us, nothing else mattered. When he kissed me, it was as if all the barriers we had so carefully built crumbled at once. It was soft and desperate, tender and intense, laden with months of denial and unadmitted desire. And when we finally separated, we were both trembling. What do we do now? My voice was weak, almost inaudible. We faced the consequences together. His forehead touched mine. As we always have. The decision to refuse Princess Ilara caused exactly the scandal we had foreseen. The neighbouring kingdom was offended, interpreting the refusal as an insult. Threats of war were whispered, alliances were questioned. And inside the castle, the nobles who already viewed me with suspicion were now certain. I was the witch who had bewitched the king. But something surprising happened as well. The common people, those I had tried to represent in every council, those whose lives we had worked to improve, began to speak out. They said the king deserved happiness, that he had given so much for the kingdom that he had the right to choose his own heart. It was not unanimous. Far from it. But it was a loud enough voice to tip the scales, to make the impossible possible. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a private ceremony witnessed only by those who truly mattered. It was not the grand royal wedding a queen deserved, but it was ours, authentic and deeply felt. I wore a simple dress, white as the first snow, without the jewels and ornaments that were traditional. He stood beside me without a crown, just a man choosing his woman. And when we made our vows, they were not the pompous words of royal rituals, but simple, true promises to stand side by side, no matter what came. There were consequences, as we knew there would be. Some nobles left the court in protest. The tension with the neighbouring kingdom took months to resolve through other alliances and diplomatic concessions. And the whispers never completely ceased. There would always be those who saw me only as the maid who seduced a king. But there were also changes that neither of us foresaw. Our union became a symbol of something greater, that birth did not determine worth, that love and merit could transcend the rigid barriers of social class. Other changes followed, laws that allowed marriages between classes, that gave rights to children born outside of marriage, that recognized dignity in everyone, not just the well-born. The kingdom did not crumble as many had predicted. Instead, it slowly began to transform into something new, something that balanced tradition with progress, honor with humanity. And when, a year after our wedding, I gave birth to a daughter, the castle bells rang not in mourning for the scandal, but in genuine celebration. She was born with his dark eyes and my mother's hair, a bridge between worlds, a living symbol that the impossible had become real. We named her Aurora, for being born at dawn, marking the beginning of a new era. And as I held her for the first time, feeling her small, perfect weight in my arms, I looked at the man beside me, the king who had covered me with his mantle when I was nobody, and I finally understood what we had created. It was not just love, although there was abundant love. It was not just a partnership, although we worked side by side in everything. It was a legacy, the building of a world where our daughter would not have to fight as we had fought, where her birth would not be a shame but a celebration, where she could be whoever she chose to be. The years that followed brought challenges that tested our union in ways we had never imagined. Aurora grew like a wildflower, beautiful and untamed, with the insatiable curiosity she had inherited from us both. At 3, she was already running through the castle corridors, asking questions that embarrassed the more conservative nobles and drew laughter from the servants. Watching her grow was like seeing my own transformation reflected in miniature. She did not know the invisible chains I had carried, did not understand the looks of contempt that had once followed me. For her, the world was infinite possibility, and each day brought new discoveries. But not all was light. There were those who still saw our daughter as a stain on the royal lineage, the product of a union that should never have existed. Poisonous whispers followed her as she passed, comments about impure blood, and questioned legitimacy. And although we tried to protect her, we knew that eventually she would have to face the same battles we had faced. The moment came sooner than we expected. Aurora was 6 when it happened. We were in the Great Hall during a summer banquet, and she was playing near the main table with other noble children. I was watching her out of the corner of my eye, always vigilant, when I heard the sharp voice of one of the girls. "My mother says you're not a real princess." The child was perhaps 7, with blonde hair in elaborate braids and a blue silk dress. "She says your mother was a maid, that you have dirty blood." The hall did not fall completely silent, but I felt the shift in the air, that familiar weight of collective attention disguised as indifference. I stood up instinctively, but he held my wrist, a gentle touch that made me stop. "Wait," he whispered. "Let her answer." Aurora looked at the girl with those deep, dark eyes, so much like her father's. For a moment I feared she would cry, that the childish cruelty would hit her as it had hit me so many times. But then she did something that filled me with a pride so intense it hurt. "My mother was not a maid," she said, her voice clear and firm. "She is the queen. And before that, she was the king's advisor. And before that, she was someone brave enough to survive when everyone wanted her to disappear." She turned to look at me across the hall, her eyes meeting mine. She taught me that blood doesn't make anyone better or worse. What we do with our lives is what matters. The silence that followed was absolute. The blonde girl backed away, confused, clearly not expecting such a response. And then something surprising happened. One of the other children, the son of a recently ennobled merchant, approached Aurora and offered his hand. "Do you want to play knights and dragons? I can be the dragon." Aurora smiled, took his hand, and together they ran to the garden, followed by several other children. The blonde girl was left alone, watching them go with a lost expression. I looked at him and I saw tears shining in his eyes. "Our daughter," he whispered, "has more strength at 6 than many adults in this hall will have in their entire lives." "She is the daughter of warriors," I replied, squeezing his hand. It could not be otherwise. But that incident was just the first of many. As Aurora grew, the criticism became more sophisticated, more cruel. There were nobles who refused to recognize her as the legitimate heir, who pushed for changes in the laws of succession. Some openly suggested that he should marry again, have children with someone of pure blood. Each attack on our daughter was like a blade in my heart. There were nights when I questioned if we had made the right choice, if our love had been worth the price she would pay. But then I would look at Aurora, see the strength and compassion she demonstrated daily. And I knew it had. When she turned 10, we decided it was time to truly prepare her for the future that awaited her. Not just as a princess, but as a leader. We began to bring her to the council meetings, allowing her to observe the complexities of governance, the delicate negotiations, the necessary compromises. She learned quickly, asking probing questions that often revealed flaws in carefully constructed arguments. She saw the world with fresh eyes, untainted by the traditions that limited the adults around her. And slowly, even the most resistant nobles began to respect her. But the real test came when she was 12. A devastating plague struck the southern provinces, decimating crops and spreading famine. The council was divided on how to respond, some advocating for minimal aid to preserve the royal coffers, others arguing for massive intervention. It was Aurora who broke the impasse. She stood up during the council, small but impossible to ignore, and spoke with a voice that brooked no argument. You discuss numbers and strategies as if they were pieces on a chessboard. Her eyes pierced each councillor present. But these people who are starving are not pieces. They are like my grandparents would have been, like my mother was before you saw her as human. If we cannot protect our weakest, then what is all this power for? The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Then he stood up, placed a hand on our daughter's shoulder, and looked at the assembled councillors. "My daughter has spoken with a wisdom that shames us all. We will send immediate aid. We will open the royal granaries. And any noble who questions this decision can come speak with me personally." No one questioned it. That night, after Aurora was asleep, we stood on the balcony of our chambers, watching the stars as we had done so many times over the years. He pulled me close, and we rested in the comfortable silence that only comes from years of companionship. "Do you think we've done enough?" My voice was low, filled with worries that never completely disappeared. "Have we prepared her properly? Look at what she has become." His voice had that soft quality he used only in our most intimate moments. A 12-year-old girl who defends the weak with more passion than 60-year-old councillors. A child who understands justice better than men who have studied law their entire lives. He turned me to face him, and I saw immense pride in his eyes. "We have prepared her to be better than both of us, and she will be." Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of gratitude, of relief, of a love so deep it couldn't be put into words. Everything we had fought for, every sacrifice, every battle, had been worth it for this moment, for knowing that we would leave behind a better world. The years continued to pass, bringing changes that transformed the kingdom in subtle but profound ways. Aurora grew into a leader the people loved, not for her birth but for her merit. And when the day finally came for her to take the throne, there was no contest. Even the most conservative recognized that she was exactly what the kingdom needed. But before that day came, there was still one last story to be told, one last thread to be tied. And that story began on a stormy night, when messengers arrived at the castle bringing news that would change everything again. The storm had begun at dusk, with thunder that shook the windows and lightning that lit up the sky in ghostly flashes. I was in the library, our private sanctuary, reviewing reports when I heard hurried footsteps in the corridors. Something in the urgency of those steps made me stand up, my heart already racing before I even knew why. He entered moments later, his hair damp from the rain, his breath ragged. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years, a mixture of shock and something that almost looked like hope. "News has arrived from the kingdom where your mother was born." His words came out quickly, charged with restrained emotion. "The king there, your maternal uncle, is dying, and he has asked to see you before he passes." I stood paralyzed, processing information that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my history. "Uncle? My mother had family I didn't know about." "Royal family? Your mother was a princess," he said, approaching. "She fled an arranged marriage to a cruel man, sought refuge here. She changed her name, hid her identity. When I found her working as my mother's advisor, I already knew the truth, but I respected her wish to remain hidden." He paused, swallowing hard. "She never wanted you to know. She feared her family would look for her, that they would use you as a political tool." "So you always knew?" My voice came out calmer than I expected, though storms raged within me. "From the beginning, you knew I had royal blood." "Yes." He didn't hesitate, didn't try to apologize. "But that never mattered. You never needed royal blood to be worthy of respect. That was something you earned on your own." His words should have comforted me, but they only amplified the confusion. My entire life had been defined by being a bastard, by carrying the shame of an impure birth. And now I was discovering there was another narrative, another story that had been hidden from me. "He wants to see me? Why? After all these years, after my mother died without him lifting a finger to help her?" "Because he is dying. And because, according to the letter, he has regretted it every day since she fled." His voice was gentle, understanding. "You don't have to go. The choice is yours." I lay awake all night, wrestling with decisions that seemed impossible. Part of me wanted to refuse to let that man die without meeting the niece he had ignored his whole life. But another part, the part that had grown up with unanswered questions, longed for answers. At dawn, I made my decision. We would go he and Aurora, together, as we always faced everything. The journey took 2 weeks, crossing mountains and forests that my mother had traversed decades earlier, fleeing a destiny she did not want. Each step brought me closer to a past I had never known, to a heritage that had been denied. The kingdom was smaller than ours, but rich in history and culture. The people in the streets looked at our procession with curiosity and something that looked like reverence. When we arrived at the palace, we were greeted by a middle-aged woman with eyes that strangely reminded me of my own. "I am Irina, your cousin," she said, tears streaming freely. "You look so much like her. Aunt would have been so proud." I was led to the royal chambers, where a frail man lay on an elaborate bed, surrounded by doctors and priests. When his eyes met mine, something in them lit up, a spark of recognition that transcended words. "You have her eyes," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "And her strength too, I hear. The queen who started as nothing and transformed a kingdom." He coughed, and doctors approached, but he waved them away with an impatient gesture. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let her go. I thought I was protecting our kingdom, preserving traditions, but I lost my sister, and I almost lost you too. Why now? Why call for me only when you are dying?" "Because a foolish old man finally understood that tradition without love is a prison." He extended a trembling hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. "You don't have to forgive me. But I need you to know your mother was the bravest person I ever knew. And you, from what I've heard, have inherited every ounce of that courage." We spent 3 days in that foreign kingdom that should have been my home. I met cousins I never knew I had, heard stories about my mother that rewrote the narrative I had carried. She had not been a passive victim, but a warrior who chose her own path, even knowing the price. On the last day before we left, my uncle summoned me again. He was even weaker, death clearly near, but there was something he needed to say. This kingdom has no direct heirs. His children watched him with visible tension. Irina is capable, but the old laws require the throne to pass to the direct line. He paused, his breathing labored. You are the last direct descendant of my lineage. The throne should be yours by right of blood. The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone awaited my answer, each person present aware that this moment would determine the future of an entire kingdom. I looked at that dying man, at the cousins I barely knew, at the kingdom that should have been mine. And then I looked at my husband and my daughter, standing by the door, representing everything I had built, everything I had fought for. I thank you for the honor, I finally said, my voice firm. But my place is not here. I turned to Irina, saw hope and fear mixed in her eyes. My cousin has ruled by your side for years. She knows these people, this place. The old laws can be changed just as we have changed so many others. Let the throne pass to her, and our kingdoms will be allies, united by blood and choice. The relief on his face was evident. I was right about you, he said, his voice barely audible. Your mother always said that true nobility lies in choices, not in birth. You have proven that today. He died that night peacefully, knowing his kingdom was in good hands. And when we departed the next morning, we took with us not just answers about the past, but a bridge to the future, an alliance that would strengthen both kingdoms. The journey back was lighter than the one there. Aurora asked incessant questions about everything she had seen and learned, her young mind already processing the political and personal implications. And as we rode under a clear sky, I felt something I hadn't expected. Completeness. I finally knew my whole story, all the pieces of the puzzle that made up who I was. When we spotted the towers of our castle on the horizon, I felt a wave of belonging so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This was my home, not by blood or tradition, but by choice, by love, for every battle fought and won. And as I looked out the window of our chambers that night, watching the sun rise over the kingdom I now helped to shape, I knew the future would still bring challenges, but I also knew, with a certainty that warmed me like a fire on a cold night, that we would face it all together. The destiny that began with a gesture of a mantle and words of protection had transformed into something that transcended all expectations, into a love that defied conventions, into a legacy that would change generations. If you've made it this far, I hope this story has touched your heart as much as it touched mine to tell it. This is an invitation for you to be part of this journey. Leave a comment sharing your opinion. Give a like if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories that explore the power of resilience and transformation. Your participation keeps the flame of the narratives that need to be told alive.